What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of AllSmith. Today's guest is the Mayor of Coronado. He's a part business owner, part endurance athlete, and a full-time jack of all trades. Today, I'm excited to connect with Richard Bailey. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me on.
Dude, I'm excited to chat with you. And before we unpack everything, you summited Everest, man.
Yeah, just about a month ago today, I was on the summit of Mount Everest.
That is so cool. And, you know, some people look forward towards the outcome of things. I loved your post reflection around the days and the lead up. And also a very important part of the story is not making it your first time and battling being sick and a respiratory issue and not being able to maintain hydration. For people to gain a little bit of context about you outside of the political sphere and understand your character, what was that experience like?
I don't know if we have enough time to cover it all. Honestly, and if I were to kind of provide a brief synopsis of how much this journey, this experience really meant to me, it would have to start out back when I was 12 years old. My mom actually took me to go see an Everest documentary at the IMAX theater over Balboa Park. And it chronicled the 1996 Everest expedition, which the book Into Thin Air is based on. And there was something about seeing these climbers pushing themselves to their absolute limits, battling the mountain, battling nature, and really putting their lives on the line for no other reason than just to prove they could do it and prove to themselves they could get to the top. There was something that just captivated me about it. And from that moment through the rest of up until this point in my adult life, I knew I had to try it just to prove to myself whether or not I had what it took to get to the top. And so back in around 2020, during COVID, I was laying in bed and, thinking about Everest. And like many people, I'm kind of an Everest enthusiast. I like to consume all the documentaries about Everest, like to read all the articles about Everest and the various accounts of people that actually made it to the summit. And I just started asking myself, well, you've always thought about doing this. You've always told yourself you're going to. What steps have you actually taken to get it done? And so within a couple months, I booked a trip. My girlfriend and I, we flew to Nepal. We hiked to Everest Base Camp. And I just had to see the mountain with my own two eyes and see the summit from afar and really ask myself, all right, is this something you're serious about? Is this something that feels like you could do if you really put your mind to it? And the answer was yes. So for the next 3 years after that, I went to a mountaineering course in the Sierras. I climbed several other mountains in the Sierras. I went over to Ecuador to start some of the 6,000 meter climbs. I went down to South America and climbed Aconcagua, which is the tallest mountain in South America. So little by little, gaining the skill set and the experience necessary to give yourself a chance to summit Everest. And I say chance because for high altitude mountaineering, there really is no guarantee at all, no matter how well equipped you are, no matter how skillful you are, no matter how experienced you are, that you will reach the summit of that mountain. It's always just a chance. And so I wanted to put myself in a position where I had a chance to succeed. And then back in 2023, so a year ago, went to Nepal again, this time with the intention of summiting Everest. And a lot of people don't realize this, but you can only summit Everest in the month of May. And the reason you can only summit Everest in the month of May is because the rest of the year, the jet stream actually travels over Everest. And so if you're standing on the summit, you'd be blown off the mountain with 200 mile per hour winds. And during the spring season, the jet stream moves off the summit, and then you're kind of just waiting for a good weather window. And that weather window might be 1 day long in a season, and it might be 1 week long. And you just don't know until that weather window actually presents itself. So climbers get there middle of April. They spend a lot of time acclimatizing, and then eventually they make their summit push, which takes about 5 to 6 days once that weather window does open up. And unfortunately for me last year, right around the time I was beginning my rotation up the mountain the first time, I came down with a really bad lung infection. And there's this part on the mountain in particular where when you're traveling from base camp, which is about 17,500 feet, to Camp 1, it's the most dangerous part of the mountain. And the reason it's the most dangerous part of the mountain is because you're traveling through this giant glacier that's always moving, and they have these large seracs, which are just basically large blocks of ice that are kind of hanging above you. And they're going to break. It's just a question of when will they break. And you just have to hope that they won't break when you're walking right underneath them. And these exist all throughout that space from base camp to Camp 1. And so because of that, to mitigate the risk, you climb at night when it's the coldest. So you usually leave base camp around midnight or 1 a.m. And if everything goes well, within the next 6 to 8 hours, you should be through the ice fall, right as the sun's starting to come up, and you'll be at Camp 1. Once the sun starts to come up, things warm up, the sunlight hits the ice, things start to melt, and it becomes more likely these large seracs are going to break. And so after I had this lung infection, I tried to recover back down to Kathmandu, actually flew back to base camp, tried to make it through the ice fall. And after a few hours, I realized I'm going so slow here, and I have absolutely no energy. There's no way I'm going to be able to make it through this before the sun comes up. And it was just a risk I wasn't willing to accept. And so I had to eat a really big piece of humble pie and head back down to base camp, fly back to Kathmandu, and then back home. And that was one of the most, that was a period of time that was one of the most depressed I've ever found myself. Because here you are, you fly back home, and I was very public, especially in my current position as the mayor of Coronado, where everyone in town knew I was gone. I was very public about blogging about my experience day to day as I was having it. And to have to come back home and kind of admit temporary defeat when every time someone would ask, oh, how was your trip? I didn't make it. How was the summit of Everest? I actually didn't make it. And to have to repeat that over and over and over again, or have people that you knew wanted to ask you about it, but also knew that you didn't make it, so they weren't going to ask you about it, it just ate at me. And I couldn't sleep for months. I was just tossing and turning, thinking about when's the next time I can realistically go back. And
what I like about what you just said, though, Richard, is admitting temporary defeat. I think the word temporary is really critical there, knowing that you hadn't made it yet. And that intrinsic belief, I think, is such a valuable mindset component in the sense of you had this dream from 12.
Yep.
You're somebody, at least in spending a small amount of time with you so far, actions and words align for you. You said you were going to do this thing. You were committed to doing this thing. You put in the work, the effort, the travel, hired the people to assist in the development of your athleticism and the unique skill set that you needed to make it, and then realize that given the certain set of circumstances and the variables that were outside of your control, aka sickness, you realized okay, I have to make a really challenging decision now. Being in the public eye, I have to face this and I have to own it. But I love to say this on the show, it's a mystery looking forward, but it's science looking back. That helped fortify the resilience. And also, in reading your post, it felt like you reflected and had a lightness as far as the journey because you didn't place the expectation in alignment with your identity anymore.
It's very true. It's very true. And that first go around in 2023, I was so focused on the summit. That's all I wanted to do was summit. Summit, summit, summit. That's the only thing that was on my mind.
Outcome mindset.
Outcome. This time around, I see a therapist sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, and just to kind of work on mindset. And one of the things we really practiced was not focusing on the outcome, but focusing on the journey. And I know it sounds cliche. If I was telling myself this a year and a half ago, I would have laughed at myself. Like, come on, you don't need to be so cliche about things. But it was so true that simply focusing on the process. Hey, if I focus on the process and I do everything I can to give myself a chance to succeed, and I focus on the other people around me, enjoying the moment, enjoying the experience, not being fearful of going through the ice fall again, but just enjoying that experience, accepting there's inherent risk in it, just like there's inherent risk in everything, but just enjoying the entire process, enjoying the journey. The summit will come, because the summit's part of the journey, but it's not everything. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, that mindset definitely helped carry me through.
It's so cool that you say that. And I understand what you're saying around the cliche component, but like there's a difference between saying the sexy thing on a podcast or an Instagram reel and actually living it.
Yeah.
And when you think about the humility of just like putting one foot in front of the other, like it seems relatively easy, but it becomes the art of mastering the mundane. Will you describe what it was like actually being in those trenches? Because I heard you talk about it a little bit where it's like step one, step two, fall back down. Step one, step two. What was that process like for you, and how did you maintain a level of motivation?
It was an absolute grind. And there was, all this, I'm sure you get these too on your, Instagram feeds and whatnot. There's a lot of positive motivation talk that's out there, and like the whole notion of learning to enjoy the suck. And there's nothing that is suckier than on 4 hours of sleep with one bag of white rice with no hydration, having to perform for 24 straight hours up a super steep incline of an ice wall, and knowing that every single time you're kicking your crampons into this ice wall and then using your Jumar to pull yourself up, that you're going to have to repeat that 10,000 more times. And once again, just for the chance of reaching the summit, just hoping everything else cooperates. And so you really do have to dig deep. And that was probably the most rewarding part of this entire trip, is seeing how deep you're capable of digging, how much grit you really actually have. And one of the mantras that myself and I know several other members of the group would share with each other is kind of when you're going through that suck is, hey, one time for the rest of your life. You do this one, you don't have to climb this ice wall every single day for the rest of your life. You climb it one time, and then for the rest of your life, you have climbed that ice wall. For the rest of your life, you have summited Everest. For the rest of your life, you've had this journey. And that really was a big motivator for me to keep putting that one foot in front of the other.
That's so cool. One time for the rest of your life. Have you happened to see the movie Little Giants?
I don't think I have.
It's a football movie.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And there's the ice box. And like it's the kids that maybe aren't so talented versus the kids that are really talented. And one group is getting like hand-me-down gear and the other group is getting like the really fancy stuff.
Yeah.
And that was their mantras. One time. Is when you go into a battle with the best of the best, you may get one shot to capitalize on them not giving you the respect, or them not giving the focus. And I just think it's such a childlike mindset that I never want to let go of like, okay, we may not have the strength, the skill, the speed, or all the things, but all it takes is one time for a knockout.
That's right.
That's a really cool mindset. I love that. Self-reflecting now, were there some really special connections and memories that you built on that trek towards the Mount Everest summit? Like some relationships too that you're going to hold on to for the rest of your life?
Absolutely. There's anytime you go through something like that, even, it was over the course of 40 days. And so for 40 days, you're living with a group of, in our case, we had 7 people on our immediate team and probably about 20 people in the larger group. And so you're sharing everything with these members of your team. I mean, you're eating together, you're sleeping together, you're commiserating over the conditions of the toilets, which oftentimes there are no toilets. And so, you're bonding over all these little things. And one of the guys, halfway through the trip, he's getting married in August. He goes, oh, well, you got to come out to the wedding. He lives on the east coast of Canada. And so later this August, I'll be going to his wedding, just because you become so close with these people. A couple other, though, of the relationships that were really special to me is the Sherpas. So 2 of the Sherpas that were especially helpful to me, in addition to many others, but 2 that actually accompanied me to the summit, a gentleman named Anush and another gentleman named Katemba. And
great names, by the way.
Great names, right? I know, right up a movie.
Totally.
And Anush is very proficient at English, but he doesn't have the certified mountaineering credentials. So he was not assigned to any particular climber as their dedicated Sherpa because he's still gaining that experience. But he was a favorite of all the team members, and he just so happened to be kind of next to me as I was getting up to the summit. And then you also had Katemba, who was my dedicated Sherpa. And there was a time where, just to kind of set the stage a little bit here, when you leave Camp 4, which is the highest camp at around 26,000 feet.
Very high.
Very high. Yeah, you're on oxygen at that point. Or excuse me, most of the climbers are on oxygen at that point. And you're heading for the summit. You have approximately 8 to 10 hours, depending on how fast you're moving, depending on the conditions, it feels almost sheer vertical, whereas you're moving up maybe a couple inches at a time. And the last hour and a half of the climb, you're going along the summit ridge where you're not gaining much verticality, but it's fairly narrow and fairly the most technical part of summit day. Around the time we reached that part where we were just about to get to the summit ridge, and you could almost see the summit from where we were, the storm started coming in. And so it started to snow, right? And the visibility really died down. And at that point, I had already developed a really bad stomach bug, so I wasn't able to keep any hydration down. Every time I would take a sip of my every time I would take a sip of my water, it would just come right back up. So I hadn't consumed any hydration in probably about 36 hours. And I also couldn't really eat any of my nutrition I had packed. All of the bar. If you were to bring a bar up to the summit of Everest, like, it's going to be frozen. So you rely on other things kind of tucked away that are less susceptible to freezing, that are really easy to get down. But I couldn't get anything down. So I was struggling. In addition to the stomach infection, I also had another lung infection that was just starting to take hold. And so I was just moving so slow. So in addition to moving slow, and you got this like snowstorm coming in, it felt like that part in the movies where everyone that's watching the movies like, turn around. Like, this is the part where you should turn around. And I'd kind of told myself at that point that, like, there is no option to turn around. Like, you're summiting, period. And you're either going to, you're either going to die on this mountain, you're going to die after you summited, or you're going to summit and go home. But either way, you're summiting. Like, you don't have a choice. There is no option.
You've come too far to only come this far.
You've come, exactly. But I was going slow. And I asked Katemba if he could radio down and see what the forecast was looking like for the next couple hours. Like, if we should turn around, like, right, is the storm going to be so bad that we should turn around? And he said, no, the forecast is looking like it's not going to get worse. So we make it to the summit. We start coming back down, and my balance and my depth perception were just shot because I was so dehydrated. And this is a part, once again, on the summit ridge where it's very narrow. And there's multiple ropes that have been left over from previous expeditions. So you really got to be paying attention, make sure you're clipping into the right safety line. And there's multiple stages of rocks that you're trying to navigate with your crampons. If we get to a point, after we pass the summit ridge, now we're going to start going like down a very vertical slope. And once again, I'm moving so slow that the Sherpas, Katemba and Anush, say, hey, Richard, we're running out of oxygen. We need to go faster. I, as the client, had another bottle of oxygen. The Sherpas typically don't need as much oxygen. And so I told them, I said, well, look, I don't want to hold you guys back. You guys go on without me. I will just find my way down. I will make my way down. And to their credit, and they're professionals, but these are kids. These are guys that are 24, 26 years old. Like, they're not 40, 50-year-old super experienced mountaineers. They're very experienced in their own right, but they're just kids, right? They're just very young men. And we're not leaving you, right? They weren't going to leave me, even though they were running out of oxygen. And I'm telling them, you guys should go on. We radioed down to the expedition leader, and the expedition leader is a gentleman named Nims Dai. He's most famous for the Netflix documentary 14 Peaks. He was the guy. And Nims gets on the radio, and he says, Richard, you're moving too slow for the Sherpa to have enough oxygen, but you're also moving too slow for you to have enough oxygen. Like, I know you're hurting, but that David Goggins expression, he actually quoted it. He's like, hey, when you think you're fucked, you're really only 40% fucked.
Yep.
And that was it. And that then became my mantra. All right, you're only 40% fucked. You have no excuse. Keep moving. And so slowly but surely, like, we made our way down. I definitely picked up the pace a little bit. We finally got to a spot where we had deposited a couple extra bottles of oxygen. We swapped everyone out, and it was like, all right, we're going to be good. It's going to take us a long time. It's going to be painful to get back down. It's going to be slow, but we got enough oxygen to survive.
That's so cool. Free is the way to be. Life beats us up a bit and causes some bumps and bruises. But that doesn't mean we have to stay on the sidelines. This is why we've partnered with Kinyon Labs. Get back to doing what you love with this incredible portable device designed to get you back in the game. Kinyon is on a mission to move people from pain to possible with their top-rated red light therapy and laser solution, which tackles inflammation along with muscle and joint pain quickly and effectively. What I love is that it's portable and rechargeable, making it easy to actually incorporate into my everyday life consistently. It's small and lightweight, so you can throw it in your gym bag or work bag, or even an overnighter. Kinyon's lasers and LED combo make this cutting-edge device extremely versatile for use with general aches and pains, as well as chronic back pain, arthritis, post-surgery recovery, endometriosis, and more. This has been an amazing tool keeping my elbows and knees pain-free for pressing, pulling, and squatting in the gym. Great tools like the Move Plus give me the freedom and flexibility to continue living life on my terms without limitations. There are a lot of reasons why over 15,000 people are using this device and rating it 4.7 stars and above. Head on over to kinyon.io and use code AllSmith at checkout to begin your pain-free journey. I also love just the sheer curiosity of like, yeah, I'm fucked, but like, how far can we take this?
Yeah.
and I saw you talk about that gentleman, Nims. You had a really great caption about him, and one of the lines that you said was, "Success is no coincidence." I really like that. Will you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nims, his experience, he was in the special forces for the Gurkha, which is the Nepalese special forces. And that's where a lot of his training and his mindset come from. And whenever he would, so this is my third time climbing with Nims, and he's the kind of guy that doesn't take no for an answer, and he holds everyone to a very high standard. And if he sees anyone on his team, whether it's the climber or the Sherpa or the other guides, doing anything that is not up to like perfect standards and how things should be each and every time, he lays into them. And it goes back to that quote, success is no coincidence. Like, hey, if we're going to be successful here, it's because we're going to be disciplined. We're going to do all the little things that gives us a chance to succeed. And that way, when we do succeed, it's not going to be by happenstance. It's going to be because of all those little things we did. Mm-hmm. And he really does embody that himself as a person, and he does instill that in his team of guides and his climbers.
I love that so much, because success is not just this monumental thing that happens at the drop of a hat. It comes in the form of the addition and the multiplication of the micro actions of every single day. How you orient yourself, how you consistently put in the positive action and then diffuse that into the tribe. And I love that he doesn't just hold himself to that, but he holds everybody else to that standard as well. And in the words of our good friend Eric from Trident Coffee, a rising tide lifts all boats.
It sure does.
That's special, man. That's really cool. But you're not just a mountaineer guy. You're also a guy that qualified for the Boston Marathon and just kind of participated in that thing with a 3 hour and 1 minute qualifying time. How do you find time around being a mayor, a business owner, to sneak in the training for all of these things? Like, what does your day-to-day kind of look like where you can fit in putting in these miles and getting in the gym and working with the experts that are going to push you towards your peak expression?
The day-to-day definitely varies. And I appreciate you asking that question, especially right now, because for me, I'm kind of out of my routine, and I'm kind of searching for the what's next. And so I haven't gone back in that routine. I haven't really clicked it into gear since coming back from Everest of being disciplined as I should be. When I am disciplined, though, finding that time is really easy. Like, right, when you have a clear goal, it's really easy to figure out what the path is to reach that goal. The question is, well, what is the goal? And if you don't know what the goal is, then you're kind of lost. So in regards to the Boston Marathon, I've been running marathons since I was probably 22. So I've been running marathons for about 15 years, but I had never really actually dedicated myself to a very regimented training schedule, a very regimented nutrition schedule, and a very regimented protocol for day of and day before the marathon. And here's a goal of qualifying for the Boston Marathon. I think it's only like 2% of marathoners have ever qualified. And so I looked at what the qualifying time was. And for my age group was 3:05. And about a year and a half ago, I just made the decision, all right, I'm going to qualify. So in order to qualify, what are the steps I need to do? So that's my goal. In order to qualify, I knew I didn't have the training plan, and I knew myself well enough to know I needed the accountability. So I went out and got a run coach, put together a training plan for me, reported to that run coach, every single day at the end of every one of my workouts, stuck to it. And gosh, what do you know? When you stick to a plan and you remain disciplined, you end up accomplishing your goal.
Something I like to say is compliance is science.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's not rocket science, right? Like it just happens. Like it happens if you comply with exactly what your plan is.
That's cool.
Not complicated. Man.
That's really cool. What was that like? How did you fit in some of those training miles? Because some days they're a little shorter, a little bit easier to fit those in. And then you have, typically in the beginning, at least from what I've seen from marathon training programs, you have your 1 day a week. That's your 10 plus.
Oh yeah.
Coronado's not a bad place to run, but you still got to sneak in the time, the effort, and the compliance, as we alluded to before.
Yeah. It varied day by day. So I try to make my shorter runs always in the mornings, but like you said, the longer runs, the 10 to 20 milers, they're going to start adding up. Usually most runners will put that on a weekend where they tend to have fewer things. For me, because my schedule, because of my job, is kind of all over the place. Sometimes you have morning community meetings that the mayor's supposed to be at, and I can't just say, sorry guys, I'm going to go for a run. Or sometimes you have events at night where you're giving presentations, or you have city council meetings, or whatever it happens to be. So you can't be like, oh, sorry guys, I'm not going to approve your housing permit because I'm going to go for a run, right? Other people are depending on you. And so I just became really good about whatever my training plan required for that day. If I couldn't get it done in the middle of the day or at night, or even like, around 8 or 9 a.m. in the morning, I'm going to wake up at 4 a.m. and I'm going to get it done in the morning.
Wow.
And if my morning's pretty jammed and my afternoon's jammed and even my evening's jammed, so be it. I will run from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. at night. And so there were many nights during the marathon training where, all right, I'm going down the Silver Strand at 1 a.m. and then getting back home very, very at the wee hours of the morning, because that's what the training plan required. And I had committed, I'm doing this. Like, I'm going to get this done, and I didn't want to miss a workout.
That's special, man. Where does that discipline come from? What is it about who you are as a man and how you foster this development level discipline and courage and adventure seeking? Is it something from your childhood? Is it something that was ingrained in you from your parents?
Honestly, probably not.
Interesting.
My mom actually hates that I do this stuff.
Really?
Oh, she hates it.
That's great. I want to hear about that. Yeah. Because every time my mom sees like a video of me lifting, she's like, you need to stop. You're going to hurt yourself. I'm like, I can't help it, Mom. I like moving things.
Right. Like moving things. And for some reason, that is who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes you happy.
Mm-hmm.
And doing marathons, doing triathlons, climbing mountains, I find a lot of happiness doing that. And I think it's because in some ways, it gives me some purpose. And maybe that purpose is just proving to yourself that you can do this and living up to your potential. I just like to do cool stuff. And to me, that's cool. To other people, climbing Everest isn't that cool. Like, it's not something they would ever want to do. But for me, there's something really captivating about seeing other people that are accomplishing these really big things that very few other people are willing to put them. I think most people could qualify for the Boston Marathon. I know most people could summit Mount Everest. But that's not the question. The question is, are you willing to do what it takes to qualify for Boston? Are you willing to do what it takes to summit Everest? And the fact of the matter is, most people aren't. And so there's an implicit challenge in there to me that, all right, well, if most people aren't willing to do this, for some reason I feel compelled, I need to go prove it to myself that I can do this, that I do have what it takes. So I don't know where that drive comes from, but I have it. And my mom is
to echo David Goggins' it's being uncommon amongst the uncommon,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of like, yeah, people could do this, but will they?
Right.
And I think I'd even take it a step further. Will they, given the job constraints that you have and the judgment and the public eye, where everything you do could potentially be scrutinized? If somebody sees you out for a run when they want you to be somewhere else and trying to micromanage or control your time, your energy, your focus based on a personal agenda that they may have.
Sure.
And so your ability to practice the art of patience with Everest, to draw boundaries, but more importantly, like, I'm sure a lot of these longer endurance pieces are clarity for your mind, allowing you to process things. Do you find that they give you better innovation, better ideas, better ability to manage stress and problem solve a little bit?
They give you much better perspective on what's important and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about living on a mountain for 30 plus days where you're really only focused on a handful of things, getting enough hydration, getting enough food, trying to get some sleep, and then surviving the elements.
I was going to say survival's a big one.
It's literally, and that's really where your mind goes. And so you kind of block out all the noise, and there's something that's just very peaceful about getting back to, my job here is to survive. What does it take to survive? And, when I came back home, like, Coronado is not a big city, right? We don't have a really big population. We don't have, it's not an overwhelming city to be in, like, say, New York City, like down over in Manhattan. But I remember, like, coming off the mountain and, like, flying back home and just walking around town, and it was kind of overwhelming. All of the different stimulus that are out there, like even stuff from the noise from the cars, like barking dogs, people like opening and shutting their doors. You kind of start looking around and you're like, wow, like, there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of distractions, and I kind of miss being on the mountain. Like, I miss that peacefulness of just being able to focus on the really basics of existing.
It's a reason why John Muir says the mountains are calling and I must go.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's so many distractions and inputs in our day to day. And the peaceful component of, for me, it was being in the Mammoth area and hiking in the high Sierras up there and pursuing lakes that you cannot drive to.
Right.
And something euphoric about that experience is it forces you to actually be with your thoughts. You lose cell phone service. You're paying attention to the terrain, the birds, the miscellaneous wildlife, the shift in wind and sun, and connectivity to the biological roots of, like, why are we here? And there's something primal and animalistic to that.
Yes.
That just, like, allows the frequency at which we operate to better connect with the natural habitat.
You feel more alive.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you feel, that's how I felt. Like, whereas I felt, gosh, this is really living, not with all these other kind of superfluous things that we've created, which are great in their own right. But man, there's something about, like, your mindset just clicking into, you're one with nature. Like, you're out here, it's just you, there's no distractions, and your job is to get through it.
I'd even take it a step further too around the importance of tribal nature, right? It'd be very easy in your job to be like, yeah, I don't have time. I got to focus on these things that are bigger, more pressing issues associated with San Diego County and Coronado and all those things. But it also allowed you to develop a tribe. And there's commonalities, and there's problem solving, and there's miscellaneous components of, once again, to relate to David Goggins, when the signals of your body and your mind are telling you to stop, you need to figure out how to just keep going. Where pain is a signal, but you don't have to listen to that little voice in your head. And it's a lot easier when you can kind of ping pong those ideas with the other people that are going through something relatively similar and they get it.
Yep.
Versus people that maybe can't relate or haven't had that experience.
It's very true. Like, you see, I am absolutely sure that every person on our team at one point thought, I want to turn around. I don't want to do this anymore. But in that moment, they see other people on the team that are doing it, that are continuing to put one foot in front of the other, and that inspires them to keep going. Mm-hmm. And that at some other point, that person, they have the motivation, they're going on their own. And say myself or another person on the team starts thinking, gosh, man, that little voice starts to creep in, but my tribe's moving on, so I'm going to continue to move on too. Yeah, you do find strength in that.
That's really cool, man. Coronado.
Yeah.
It's such a special place. In meeting you today, you carry Coronado frequency.
Oh, thanks.
And it's magnetizing. Coronado has that feeling. When I cross the bridge, it's a different energy than places that I felt previously. The only place that I would maybe relate it to is Malibu in some ways. And it's a really peaceful, connective, collaborative space, but there's also high performers.
Yes.
And they're high performers that take time to actually do this and engage. They're very respectful of the community orientation. They are very aware of the surroundings. I mean, concerts in the park is not just a beautiful party and connective component, but like everybody's very respectful of space and cleaning up. And, you know, there's a pride that I feel like people take in Coronado, and that, in my opinion, is a trickle down from the leadership.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you for the place that you're the mayor of to have such a special energy and so many people that hold the standard in alignment with your vision?
It's an absolute honor. Like it is the biggest honor of my life to represent the place I call home, Coronado. I think one of the things that really makes Coronado unique is that it was built as a resort town. Like it was the founders of our city built it with the vision of the Hotel Del. And so they purchased the land, they subdivided the land, they sold off the lots to help finance the construction of the Hotel Del. So the city was always built around the Del. But not too long after that, you also had the military come in and establish military installations, which eventually, there actually was at one point an Army installation, but eventually it all became Navy. And many people might not be aware of this, but every single Navy SEAL that currently serves our nation does their training in Coronado. And then half remain stationed here in Coronado, and the other half are stationed out of Virginia Beach. Exactly. And so we have this, although Coronado is a resort community, and it's a very affluent, pricey community, the military, the Navy, those young guys that are busting their hump to go through buds and become SEALs and defend our nation, they keep us grounded. And one of the coolest parts about Coronado is that you can go into, my favorite local spot is McPee's. It's an Irish pub right on Orange Avenue there. And you could be sitting at the bar, and on your left side might be a Navy SEAL who just got back from combat. On the right side might be a guy that's a multi-billionaire, very successful businessman, founded his own company. And no one's going to brag about what they do. Mm-hmm. They're going to have genuine conversations with one another. And you really have like this tight-knit community where you have the affluence and success of people that have really gone above and beyond and performed in their own industries. And you have the grounding force that reminds us all that, hey, there's people out here that are defending our nation, that are making our freedoms possible, that are sitting right here at the bar with you, that are willing to put their lives on the line. And there's just this like wonderful mix that makes it special.
The Trident family taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good, bad, and everything in between. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. I start my day with the Sweet Cream Cold Brew as I am prepping my mind and body for fitness, service, coaching, and podcasting. With various locations in San Diego, they offer over 14 nitro cold brews and a variety of specialty drinks. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from the Keto Bakery. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code AllSmith to take your coffee experience to the next level. Yeah, I definitely love that, and I can't help but lean in towards the concept of you're the average of the people you spend the most time with. Mm-hmm. And I also appreciate you mentioning that, like, freedom isn't free.
Right.
Like, a lot of the sacrifices that our good friends that we cross paths with weekly put in allow us to sit here and have podcasts like this where we can chop it up and explore ideas and experiences and all those things. But something I said to you right at the onset of us meeting today was that you look at the human first. Mm-hmm. I try to coach that way. I look at the world that way. Where did that ideology land on your radar, and how do you consistently practice that with so many pressures to try to do different sorts of political reform?
Sure. So what I have found, and this might dovetail into a separate but related topic, is that the vast majority of us share similar values, and the vast majority of us want similar things. The vast majority of us, though, are not willing to show up to City Hall. what you tend to have happen in politics is you tend to have people that have an activist agenda or an agenda at all show up to City Hall with a handful of others and lobby council members. And this happens not just in Coronado, but it happens at every City Hall chamber throughout the country. And it happens at every state capitol building, and it happens over in Washington, D.C., where you have very, very narrow group of individuals that have a very, very narrow desired outcome, and they lobby. And that's fine, and that is their First Amendment right to do so. But I think it's really important, and it's often lost on a lot of policymakers, that these individuals, more often than not, do not represent the broader interests and the broader desire of the rest of the people you represent. Mm-hmm. And when you get to know the people you represent on a first name basis, and we have about 25,000 residents in Coronado, I guarantee you every single one of them either has my phone number or knows someone that does have my cell phone number and will send me a text if they ever have an issue. And so keeping that in mind, that, look, I'm not here just to answer to the people that knock on my door and give me a call for, that might have a very narrow agenda to push. I'm here to answer for the broader community.
Yeah, something that I was told about you and that I can really feel now. You practice the art of approachable leadership, and it's not exclusive stiff-arming. Like, you're willing to listen and have the conversation, even if you don't agree. And that's very honorable, and I'm sure heavy, because there's going to be energy exchanges based on the passions that people come at you with. And you do a great job of practicing the art of listening, but then not taking on everybody's challenges.
A great line I heard the other day was passionate positions loosely held. And
that's beautiful, because think about sand. If you hold on to it so tight, it just falls out of your fingers. But if you kind of loosely hold it, you can hold a mound of sand. That's a great analogy.
If someone introduces some new information, you can let that sand go and pick up some other sand. And so I'm very passionate about the positions I hold. But if someone introduces new information, I'm open to that new information to adjust the positions I hold. And that's my job, is that even though I might feel very strongly about a particular topic, I'm willing to hear what anyone else has to say about it and then adjust my position on that topic based on this new set of information. Mm-hmm. And so that it was a mentor of mine that had mentioned that, hey, have passionate positions, but hold them loosely so that you can make adjustments to them. To me, that when you follow that kind of mindset, you take things less personally. Mm-hmm. And I have friends on the political right and political left that if you were to introduce, no matter what new information you introduce to them, they don't want to hear it because it conflicts with their existing beliefs or their existing positions on both the right and the left. And I think that's a mistake. It's a mistake to simply hold on to a position because that's the position of my political party, regardless of what political party it is. And it doesn't serve anyone well in the long term. The healthier approach is simply being willing to hear new information and then just adjust accordingly and not take it personally, whether or not, all right, well, yesterday I held this position and now based on this new set of information, I'm going to hold this position because that is the best set of information I have. There's nothing wrong with that.
What I love so much about that, Richard, is it's the malleability and willingness to upgrade your personal operating system, unrelated to just the label or the title of political party. And I think part of the reason why people probably do that is just this internal fear-mongering of, am I going to be labeled as a flip-flopper?
Right.
Am I going to have to succumb to the societal pressures or fit societal norms based on historical narrative? But I feel like in your case, it goes back to what we discussed, which I love this so much, policy over politics. And you had a great post that you shared with people about that. When I say those three words, what comes to mind? Let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure. So maybe it will be, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this or the best example to give. I oftentimes point to the 2020 election in California. And California has a large percentage of voters registered as Democrat and a relatively small percentage of voters as registered Republicans. And many political races in California, you have the political affiliation next to the name of the candidate, D or R. And oftentimes, people make their vote based simply off of, well, am I registered with this political party or not? Then I'm going to support that party's candidates. regardless of what the policy positions are. So in 2020, Republicans up and down the state of California got absolutely shellacked. They lost just about every statewide race that you could. And they lost a lot of races on the local level, county level as well. But in addition to these candidate races that were on the ballot, there were also propositions that were on the ballot. And everything from rent control to affirmative action to some policing measures to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's about half a dozen that were on the ballot. And nearly every single one of these, you had the traditional conservative position win. And so that got me thinking, how could it be that the candidates that supported these propositions all lost, but the propositions themselves mostly won? And as I started reaching out to my friends, say on the political left side of the aisle, and I would ask them, well, how did you vote on this particular proposition? 9 times out of 10, they would say, well, I voted this way, which happened to be the more conservative position on that proposition. And it just really kind of reinforced to me that, wait a second, when you remove politics from the equation, when you remove politics from the conversation and don't make it a Republican argument versus a Democrat argument or a Democrat argument versus a Republican argument, when you just focus on the policy, the majority of us, regardless of political affiliation, agree. When you look at policies, when you look at issues simply based on what are the merits of this issue, what's the best policies to achieve the desired outcome around this issue, the vast majority of us, regardless of political affiliation, regardless of race, regardless of gender, the vast majority of us agree on the vast majority of things. And so when you look at, I've really tried to be perfect on this. When you look at all of my posts, whether it's on Facebook or on Instagram or on Twitter, you will rarely, if ever, see me mention this is a Republican position or this is a Democrat position. Even ones I like, even ones I dislike, I just frame it in the form of, this is a policy, here are the merits of the policy, or here's where the policy falls short, or here's what's likely to be an outcome of this policy that doesn't align with our actual goals as a society, or doesn't align with the goals that I think we should have as a society, and here's what we should be doing differently. And that, I think, allows people to not feel alienated if they happen to be members of a different political party than I am, or of the same political party that I might disagree with them on a particular issue. Invite everyone to the conversation around a policy and not just say, well, you're excluded because you're the wrong party.
What I'm hearing here, which I very much appreciate, is context matters. It's one of the things that makes long-form communication and news deliverables like this very special. And you're not just painting a corner of the picture, you're painting the whole thing. So that way people can gain total context. But what I'm curious about is, given the limited attention span of most people and so many people consuming their news from social media and TikTok and those types of platforms, it takes time, energy, attention, and focus and true care to lean into, what do these policies say? How are these going to impact me? And they're very fucking important things. Yeah. But most people, like you said, are going to lean towards the team orientation. I'm on the left or I'm on the right. I talk to this person. We seem to be relatively aligned. I'm going to lean that way. What are your thoughts on, the future of politics and how to best deliver context to help educate, motivate, and inspire people to do exactly what you just said, which is, hey, it's not about the title. It's not about the R or the D. It's about the policy and how it's going to impact you and your community.
Thomas Jefferson had this great line. I believe it was Jefferson, said, the electorate, so the voters, the electorate gets the representatives they deserve. The electorate gets the representatives they deserve. So if the electorate cares more about who Kim Kardashian is dating than they do about, well, what is your policy on homelessness? What is your policy on criminal justice? What is your policy on the border? If they care more about who Kim Kardashian is dating than those things, then they're going to get kind of ridiculous policies. Because at the end of the day, the only one that makes these policies are the people that get elected. So if you don't care what their policies are, then you're really not going to care who gets elected. And you're going to have uninformed voters that are making the decisions which then affect all these other policies.
What do you think is the best way to create education for people, though? Because in my opinion, at least leaning towards politics and education around it, it's heavy, man. Like it's deep. A lot of the terms are difficult to understand. You actually have to like dig to try to gain the context and the information. It's not loosely digested to the commoner that already is probably overwhelmed, facing financial distress,
Right.
trying to manage the day-to-day, trying to figure out just how to make their head to the pillow at nighttime. And then you add this additional thing, which has a lot of importance and value. But I guess my question is, and I talk about this a lot in fitness, is like, how do we create a lower hanging fruit for people to grasp on to understanding politics a little bit better, to then make the choice that aligns with the policy that they want?
People have to care, right? If people don't care enough, they don't have to care as much as, say, me and you about this. They definitely don't have to care as much as me, because my job is to care and like know these issues inside and out. But they have to care enough to identify the candidates that share their values and are willing to go the extra mile and dig deep on these policies and implement these policies. But if they don't care at all, then we're going to get the policies that we currently have. So there's two sides to this. You have to have an electorate that cares enough, and you have to have candidates that are talented enough or willing to put a team around them that are talented enough to digest complex issues, not necessarily in sound bites, but in digestible amounts of information that the average person who cares enough can listen to and say, you know what, you're credible on this. I share your policy position, and I'm going to check the box next to your name, and then I'm going to trust that you're going to go and do that job. Mm-hmm. So you have to have two sides to this. You have to have voters that care enough and candidates for office that are willing to put themselves through that grind, because it is a grind to be a candidate for office for sure, and talented enough to communicate in a digestible manner what these policies are.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very well said, man. 2020, that was a pretty wild time.
That was nuts.
There was patterns that were volatile, things that were implemented, families that fell apart, a healthcare crisis, and so many different things that I did not just mention. How were you able to reflect on the lessons and the observations and give it a little bit of space to kind of zoom out, observe it from that bird's eye view, allow yourself to view it from a left view, from a right view, from a healthcare perspective, and all the things in between? How were you able to do that? And what were some of the reflections that came afterwards?
Sure. Looking back on 2020, kind of trying to put yourself like back in the moment, there's obviously a lot of uncertainty. Obviously, a lot of people were panicked given the way the issues were being covered and the response from our local, state, and federal government. No one really knew what to do. And I remember trying to just stay focused on, well, what is the information we have? What is our role as a local government? And how do we maintain our role as a local government, given the information we had, while allowing the public to make decisions that are in their best interest, that allow them to make the decision based on their own risk factors, which are unique for each individual, and give them the information necessary to do that, and then allow everyone to kind of move on. That was kind of my philosophy at that time. And I took a lot of heat for that. We were, I think, one of the last beaches in San Diego County to stay open. And I remember there was a quick tangent story here. So all the beaches in San Diego County were closing. And every time a beach or another public area, like a public park, would close or a trail would close, the politician that made that decision would get glowing coverage in the media. Oh, so-and-so cares about public health. Look, they're shutting down all these public spaces. And I thought that was kind of backwards, because based on my understanding of the virus at the time, well, outdoor transmissions weren't really a thing. So why would we try to coop people up in indoor spaces? So because of my role, I had a relationship with the county public health officer, Wilma Wooten, at that time. So I contacted her office and we had a private conversation, and I just asked her, hey, are we seeing outdoor transmissions? Based on all the information you've seen here in San Diego County and throughout our state and country and around the world, are outdoor transmissions really a thing? And her response was, no, they're not. And so I asked her, I said, well, then why are we shutting down outdoor spaces? And her office shared that that is not a policy of the county, at least at that time. That was a policy coming from individual mayors and individual cities. I thought, well, that's ridiculous. So here we're making decisions to close public space, not based on science, but because on this political narrative, and you're gaining coverage in the local media and the media that's positive. So you're going to keep following that.
It's one of those moments where I just observed that based on incentive, you can predict behavior.
Absolutely.
And if somebody's getting incentivized, whether that's hospitals getting paid more for the usage of ventilators, or mass reporting of COVID, of people coming down with COVID, and the different miscellaneous numerical values that kind of got tossed around, it just seemed relatively inconsistent to me. And the first thing that came to mind for me is everything that's measured doesn't always count, and everything that counts isn't always measured. And it just perked my eyebrows a little bit, exactly what you said, just the inconsistencies of things across the board. And I'm no expert, but it is interesting that you had the courage and the honorability to just ask the questions, not in a volatile way,
right,
but in a seeking to understand way, knowing that it wasn't just your personal interest, but the interest of an entire community.
Absolutely. And that gets back to that mentality of passionate positions loosely held. I was willing to accept new information. I was seeking new information to either validate my current position or cause me to change my position, because I had the responsibility of making decisions in the best interest of my community. Mm-hmm. And so when the information got back to me that no, there are no outdoor transmissions, but you should still close anyways because that's what everyone else is doing. Well, I'm naturally a contrarian. So if you tell me you should do this because other people are doing it, I'm going to say, well, then I'm not going to do it. That's how I'm kind of naturally wired anyway. So when the information confirmed that was the best course of action, we kept our beaches open. And sure enough, the San Diego Union Tribune sent out a photographer to our beaches, and they used I believe it's called a long form lens. I'm not a photographer, but it's a lens that compresses the background into the foreground. So even though our beaches were never crowded, and we have a huge beach in Coronado, so we can fit a lot of people in there before it ever becomes crowded. Our beaches aren't crowded at all, but they use this lens and they kind of distort the image. It ends up on the front page of the UT. And the UT has some headline to the effect of Coronado Mayor endangers public health by keeping beaches open. And I remember looking at the image and be like, this isn't even our beach. That's how distorted it was. And I contacted the reporter, contacted the editor, and asked, what information do you have that the public is in greater health danger walking on our beaches than they are walking on the sidewalks in downtown San Diego? Why is it the beach is somehow where COVID hangs out, but the downtown sidewalks aren't?
Great question.
No response. Like, well, they did give a response, but the response was basically, well, you should close it because it's the right thing to do. But they couldn't tell me why it was the right thing to do.
So it was fear mongering, basically saying you're staying open and you're adding to the spreading of this virus.
Right.
But I don't have any scientific fact. I just know that other people are doing it, so I'm going to place unnecessary accusations.
That's right. That's right. And sure enough, you fast forward several months, and they're still keeping businesses closed. And when you ask, well, why are you allowing Costco's to stay open, but you're not allowing the mom and pop stores to stay open, right? I can buy shoes at Costco. I can go buy shoes at Target, but I can't buy shoes at the local mom and pop. We used to have a shoe store in Coronado that would sell shoes. It's like, well, why can't they stay open? We have a local toy store in town, and they were forced to be closed, but other, Amazon could go out and sell toys. Mm-hmm. County health regulations, state health regulations even said for a while that this local toy shop was prohibited by law or by emergency ordinance from distributing their toys or allowing customers to come by and just pick up any toys, not even go in the store, but just order online and then pick them up or have them delivered.
You can go pick up donuts and leave strip clubs open and all those things, but you caned go to the gym.
Exactly.
It did not make any sense.
No sense at all. One of the two largest comorbidities with, one of the two biggest variables that contributed to a negative outcome if you experience COVID was your weight, if you're overweight, and also if you were a smoker. And yet we allowed people to continue to go to donut shops, and we allowed people to continue to go to liquor stores and drink alcohol and smoke, which, hey, God bless you, that's not my lifestyle, but if that's what you want to do, go for it. We allowed them to do that, but we prohibited healthy people from going to the gym. Give me a break.
That was a big red flag for me around something that I talk about as an initiative on our podcast is the marriage between preventative medicine and reactive medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother's an emergency medicine doctor, a damn good one, by the way. Love watching him interact with patients and truly care and manage things, and sometimes challenge, because typically there's a numerical value before you can make assignments of certain medications or certain proposals. And he sees those values and he's like, okay, I'm observing the symptoms of this individual and I'm just going to make an executive call right here. It's very cool to watch. It's poetry in motion, in my opinion. And I'm sure there's other doctors that execute that way as well. But to make the conversation completely looking in the realm of reactive medicine, because it's so profitable, because it's related to health insurance, and to fearmonger people towards making those decisions was very unfortunate, in my opinion. I'm okay with it if you also say, hey, let's get up and get morning sunlight. Let's get optimal hydration. If we can't see people in real life, let's make sure we're making phone calls and connecting with our tribes and getting social engagement, because we have seen in tons of different research that the key component to a beautiful life is healthy, deep, meaningful relationships.
Absolutely.
All of those things were taken away. Loneliness was at a peak. Usage of social media and all those things just led to clinical and chronic depression and anxiety for people. Why was movement not talked about? And then those that were moving, I saw it time and time again, people taking videos and be like, oh, you're so selfish. Like, you're just thinking about you. It's like, no, I'm genuinely trying to take care of my health. And we can actually do this together, and we can maintain social distancing so we abide by the rules and regulations where everybody stays safe. But the worst thing we could do is stop moving.
Right.
Objects in motion stay in motion.
And what a missed opportunity this was. That should have been the narrative.
Yes.
Hey, if you're fearful of COVID, the best thing you can do is to drop 20 pounds, stop smoking, stop drinking.
100%.
You do that, you go outside and you move, you're probably going to be okay. And I think maybe the tip of the iceberg, they kind of like started changing the conversation, or at least started waking people up to ask questions about these policies, was when there was a surfer, I believe he was out in Pacific Beach. He's a lone surfer out in the water, right? Because all the beaches were closed, at least in San Diego for the most part. Mm-hmm. And you have, I believe it was either the county sheriff or San Diego PD, get in a boat and go try to chase this guy down. And here he is by himself in the middle of the ocean, and yet we're trying to chase this guy down. Why? He's out there surfing. He's doing something that's great for his mind, great for his soul, great for his body, and yet we're trying to stop him from doing that. And then you have hundreds of onlookers all packed next to each other on the bluffs overlooking the beach, watching this happen.
That's okay.
And that's okay. It's just like it was mind numbing. And I do take, so getting back to your original question on this topic of what kind of lessons did you learn from that? And the biggest lesson I learned was like, stick to your convictions until new information presents itself. And the reason I say that is because I did take a lot of flack for that, but I held true to my convictions. It cost me a lot of support. I did receive death threats from local members of our community, and I just got right through the coals from on our local social media pages for these policy decisions I was making. But when you fast forward 3 years later, and you look at which city had the lowest per capita case count in all of San Diego County and in just about most of Southern California and the state, it was Coronado. And I don't attribute that to my policies. I attribute that to only reason I share that is because we actually did follow the science. The science said you were at very low risk of getting experiencing transmission if you were outside. So we kept our outdoor spaces open, and we advocated for, or at least I advocated for, letting small businesses, at the very least, stay open, following the same procedures as the big box stores. And so it's like, gosh, like when you stick to your convictions, if they're well-founded, they might not, they might not, win the day, but over time, they will win. And so I do take a lot of pride in the sense of, hey, I stuck to my convictions. I felt very strongly about it. I reviewed all the information, and even though it wasn't the politically popular thing to do, I did what I felt was right. And then now fast forward several years later, and you can look back and you can actually say, yeah, Coronado had the lowest cases per capita even with keeping their beaches open, even with advocating for these other
But
types
the
of policies.
narrative that's not told is the management of the death threats, the emotional volatility of you probably sitting there with your hand on your head like, am I doing the right thing?
Right.
You know, I'm sure you had a circle of people that you tried to bounce ideas off of, and mentors and journaling and meditation and breath work and long runs and all the things to help manage your personal emotions. But something I think about often is leadership is fucking hard, man. And
It's lonely too.
it's lonely, and it's one of those things that's like, you have to focus on what's in your control. Here's the information I have up until this point. Here's the justification and the jurisdiction and the laws that I'm going to put into place. You're not in control of the outcome. Let's just say, hypothetically, the outcome went the other way.
Right.
That would have been a whole other set of problems that you're navigating now. And, you know, obviously you trusted your gut. You did what you felt was right based on the information that you had. But the big thing for me in the realm of politics is just this, the importance of having an open mind, knowing that you may take flack for it. But I wish that narrative was popularized.
Right.
And I don't know that it ever will be, just because of the money structure and certain people behind the scenes putting money in certain people's pockets to steer them in a certain direction. But I appreciate you sharing a little peek behind the curtain as to how you were able to make some of those decisions. It's very special, man.
Yeah, happy to do so.
Move fast and break shit. LSKD develops functional sportswear with a streetwear aesthetic that's on a mission to inspire you to chase the vibe through sport, fitness, and adventure. I train daily in the rep shorts and love the versatility they offer. The zipper pocket is an absolute game changer. I go from training at the gym directly to meetings, running errands, or prepping for podcasts. The LSKD tribe has become true family, and we are excited to continue to develop our community. Shop now at lskd.com and use code AllSmith. We chase the vibe here at AllSmith. Let's all become 1% better every day. You mentioned something the other day that I really loved, and that is governing isn't that hard if you focus on 3 specific things. What are those 3 things?
They are public safety, infrastructure, and that's really it. But it's accomplishing those 2 things in a fiscally responsible manner, which is the 3rd thing. If you can focus on those 3 things, everything else just kind of takes care of itself. And I feel like we're moving more and more into a celebrity culture, right? Where politicians these days are thought of as celebrities. Governing shouldn't be entertainment, right? Like we shouldn't have at least 3 networks or 4 networks and half a dozen cable news outlets devoted to covering politics 24/7. It becomes a circus. It becomes a reality show. Politics should be boring. We should only be focused on, well, what does our wastewater infrastructure looks like? Our pump stations are working to pump our wastewater to the treatment plants? What are the conditions of our roads? Are we fully staffed in our police department? What are the policies of our police department and our city that are going to best keep our community safe? What are the revenue sources that we need to rely on to actually fund our infrastructure and fund our public safety? And what can we do to minimize the cost of our infrastructure and our public safety in a way that doesn't undermine our goals for infrastructure and public safety? That way we're not taking more public tax revenue than we actually need. If you can just focus on that, your city's going to be in a great spot, because businesses will come in, they'll invest in the community, they'll set up the shop. Residents will then come in because they'll want to move there because it's a clean, safe place to call home. The schools will flourish because you actually have people that live in the community, that care about the community. And all government has to do is stay in its lane. But unfortunately, and this is just my opinion here, is that you have a lot of people, more and more today than ever before, that are getting into politics at every level of government, local, state, federal, that don't actually understand what lane of our society government is supposed to be operating in. And they're using government to advance their own activist agenda without any understanding of what the implications of that are for the broader society. And governing, once again, it's pretty simple if you focus on the basics. It starts getting complicated when you don't.
I think it takes a little deconstruction of the ego, like you just said, because it is becoming where politicians have this celebrity status, and the notoriety that was previously coming from Fox and CNN and, all the various media networks, I think we are seeing a little bit of a shift. Thank you, Joe Rogan.
Right.
Because, we're seeing like Robert Kennedy Jr. and other people hopping on different platforms, including Aubrey Marcus and a couple other places, and just being like, let's talk shop.
Right.
Let's be honest. Like, we're not reading from a teleprompter. You're
Right.
going to get questions asked that, may ruffle your feathers a little bit. But aside from just the answer, people get to see honest body language.
Absolutely.
They get to see emotional intelligence. They get to see calm demeanor, tone of voice. There's so many different miscellaneous factors to know if somebody's bullshitting.
Totally.
And I think it's easy to bullshit when you've got the makeup on, you're looking into a teleprompter, you've
Right.
got person standing in the back telling you to do this, that, and
Hold
the
up
other.
a cue card of,
Yeah, totally. And like, I don't know. I think you make a really good observation there of, seek to understand, make policies that are beneficial to those two things in mind, public safety and infrastructure. Another one that you mentioned is just like clean public spaces.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge one. I mean, wandering East Village in downtown San Diego, there's dog and human feces everywhere. There's people peeing around every single corner. Right. There's all kinds of fentanyl issues. And you've done this amazing, inspiring job managing the homeless population there in Coronado. You've talked about it a ton, including on Tucker Carlson, who did a great job connecting with you in a very short time frame. How were you able to tackle that issue? Because that's a really big one. And us being in San Diego and having so many former military come back that had this connection with the VA, maybe got addicted to opioids, managing PTSD, management of injury, feeling misunderstood, assimilating back into the normalcy of the day-to-day. Taking all those things into consideration, combining it with the ideology of like, we see you as a human first. We want to give you the tools to be seen, heard, understood, put a roof over your head, help solve your problems. That's a lot to tackle, man.
Sure.
And you've done a great job of creating a system and a structure. Where did that start and how has it evolved?
Yeah, so that structure actually predates me and predates my tenure as mayor. But what we've seen happen in other cities is other cities had similar policies in the past, and then they had a change of leadership, and those policies changed, and then you saw a large exponential increase in homelessness over the years throughout the state of California. In Coronado, our approach is really simple, and I've continued this approach, and our council has continued this approach, and that approach is recognizing that we have a dual responsibility. We have a responsibility to provide and at least give access to help to people that need help temporarily.
And those that are willing to accept it.
Bingo. The second responsibility we have is to the broader community, that the public spaces are truly for the public and that we're going to keep them clean and safe. And so getting back to that first responsibility, if someone is willing to accept help, there's help available. Like that is the absolute truth. The sad reality is that approximately 95 out of 100 people that are contacted by homeless outreach team, whether it's in Coronado or San Diego or the surrounding cities, 95 out of 100, when they're contacted by someone offering help, they refuse it. And so the vast majority of people that are on the streets today are what's known as chronically homeless, meaning they've been homeless for over a year. The vast majority of them do suffer, unfortunately, from drug addiction, mental illness, or both. And as tragic as that is, and it is tragic, I can't solve that for them. I can give them access to places that can help them solve their addiction, help them treat their mental illness, but unless they're willing to make that decision for themselves and exercise that offer of help, they're never going to get it. So all I can do as a government official, I can't solve homelessness. Like I love it when, I always chuckle when people say, when you have elected officials say, I'm going to solve homelessness. No, government does not solve homelessness, right? Like who solved your homelessness? You have a home. Who solved it for you?
Well, exactly what you just described. It's an accumulation of choices.
Right.
And hopefully you're making the right ones consistently over time. And I think through education and providing of access, and, I also think there's something to be said about like word of mouth, right? Like if one person is able to be successful, they can then be the leader that then communicates to other people that maybe they cross paths with of like, hey, it doesn't have to be this way.
Some of the most successful, and there aren't many, but some of the more successful homeless service providers are actually led by people that were previously homeless. And one of the, so if a city can focus on those two responsibilities, providing access to help to those who are willing to accept it, and absolutely setting the standard, we're going to keep our public spaces safe and clean for everyone else, the problem will solve itself. As long as people are willing to get help. And if they're not, that's fine, but you can't pitch your tent here. You can't drug deal. You can't sell drugs out on public spaces. You just can't. Like, we're not going to allow it. And other cities just allow that to happen without any consequences. So then that attracts more individuals. You actually have situations where you have drug dealers that are preying on the vulnerable, that are preying on vulnerable homeless populations. They become more addicted. They're less likely to get help, though they're more likely to overdose. And so it gets back to the policies we've had in place, predominantly here in the state of California. Our state makes up roughly we make up roughly 10% of the nation's population, but we make up over a third of the nation's homeless population. One stat that I think really surprises a lot of people, and I'll ask you about it, so I'll put you on the spot.
Bring it.
Okay. In 2014, there were approximately 600,000 people homeless in the entire nation. Take a guess at how many people approximately are homeless today in our nation. So 10 years later, 600,000. It's the same. It hasn't changed.
Oh, really?
Hasn't changed at all.
Interesting.
So despite the population of our nation increasing, the homeless population has remained the same over the past 10 years.
Why is it so much more visual?
Because they're being concentrated in just a handful of states.
Is that weather related?
Good question. So when you look at the data, let's talk about, look at Florida, for example. So let's look at the states with good weather. You got California that has good weather in most parts of the state, but you also have states like Idaho. We didn't see a huge spike in homelessness in Idaho. We don't see a huge spike in homelessness in Florida. We don't see a huge spike in homelessness in most other states, even states with good weather. Where we do see a spike in homelessness, state of New York. New York's not known for having great weather. I mean, their winters can be pretty brutal, and yet we saw a massive increase in homelessness there. Some people might ask, well, is the price of housing, right? The price of housing has gone up so much, so that must be the reason why we have so much more homeless in California than other parts of the nation. Okay, well, let's look at the housing data county by county within the state of California. In Santa Barbara County, the median home price is about $2.5 million, give or take. And the median home price in Humboldt County is around $500,000, right? So Humboldt County has housing that is 20% as expensive as Santa Barbara County, and yet Humboldt County has a homeless population per capita that is significantly greater than Santa Barbara County. So that argument also doesn't hold true.
Interesting.
And so when you start kind of teasing it out, what you find is that in 2014 in California, you had several propositions that appeared on the ballot. You had Proposition 47, which decriminalized a lot of drug and property crime. You had Proposition 57, which realigned our prison system and let a lot of individuals out of jail that should have been in jail for the crimes they committed. And after 2014, after these two policies went into effect, what do you know? Both homelessness and crime started to increase. A lot of people don't know that most homeless individuals, are not addicted and are not mentally ill. That makes most homeless individuals are not drug addicted and are not mentally ill. Most homeless individuals actually find a place to stay and get housing, whether through a friend, a family member, or they get a job so they're able to pay their own rent. Most get back on their feet within 2 to 4 months of becoming homelessness, according to the state's own data. But those that suffer from drug addiction will end up staying on this, are much more likely to remain on the streets and become chronically homeless for years. So if you have policies in place at the state level that decriminalize the selling of most drugs and decriminalize the possession of most hard drugs in public, then it's going to be really difficult to apprehend the individuals that are preying on this population when they're most vulnerable.
Yeah, there's no consequence.
None.
What are your thoughts and your policies associated with border control? Because with us being so close to TJ in Mexico, I would assume that a lot of this fentanyl stuff is coming up. It's getting infiltrated into the San Diego community and population, along with sex trafficking.
Right.
What are your thoughts, and how do you manage some of those things in relation to the homeless challenges that we face?
So getting back to I'm a really big believer in understanding what your lane is and then staying within that lane. As a municipality, we don't actually affect border policies. That being said, because we are nearly adjacent to the U.S.-Mexico border, it's very common for the U.S. Border Patrol to station vehicles and have a presence along Ocean Boulevard, which is this street in Coronado that is immediately adjacent to the beach, because we do have individuals coming up from Mexico that are trying to immigrate illegally into our country. And then, so the Border Patrol will go ahead and apprehend them there. We have regular flyovers of Border Patrol helicopters. In a broad sense, though, if I just take off my mayor hat and just put on my, hey, I'm just Richard Bailey with an opinion on border security, to me, we've made the worst policies possible in the sense of it is far too easy to immigrate here illegally and far too difficult for those that would add value to our society. Either they have a lot of capital resources, they have a lot of intellectual resources, or they have skill sets that we need for our nation that would benefit our nation, and we made it too difficult for those types of individuals to immigrate here legally. So show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. Mm-hmm. Well, if there's no consequences for just coming across the border illegally, well, then you're going to have a lot of people that come across the border illegally. And that's been a real travesty, because I think we're missing out on some of the best and brightest talent from around the world. We should be trying to attract them. And instead, we are unfortunately opening up essentially the front door to anyone that wants to come to our country in an illegal way where they won't face consequences. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily share our values. They don't necessarily bring a skill set or capital or intellect to our society to benefit our society. And so that's really troublesome, I think. I don't think it'll bode well for the future of our nation if we keep going in that direction.
I think in life there's givers and there's takers. Mm-hmm. And we should, exactly as you described, be attracting givers that want to fortify innovation and new businesses and ideas and collaboration. But unfortunately, they're seeking a new life and coming to a place where they're being given certain things based on tax dollars. There's a statistic here that you had on your Instagram around how the USA decreased their homeless count numbers from 622K down to 582K, but very close to that 600,000 number that you mentioned. California increased from 120K to 172K.
Right.
San Diego specifically, downtown, went roughly 582 to 1939. But the big one that perks my eyebrows here is it's roughly annually $42,000 estimated, the amount that's spent on each homeless person in San Diego. So when you think about just like we already have this homeless challenge based on the people that already live here, then we've got the border challenge of people crossing, potentially adding to that numerical value. And they're receiving government support, whether that's in the form of health care or some of the rumors around the sex changes and the surgeries and all the miscellaneous things that, definitely are a little bit interesting to say the least. How do you balance putting your Richard Bailey hat on and wanting to make an impact and a difference, but also, hey, I need to stay in my lane and realize, what falls underneath the spectrum of Mayor of Coronado?
It's tough, but I think it's the only way to do it, right? So I have a lot of opinions on a lot of topics, but I tend to only share the opinions that are within my lane or that will affect my lane. And so that's why I do feel comfortable talking about homelessness on a broader issue, because if we have neighboring cities that have very weak policies regarding homelessness, well, that will have an impact on my city because it'll attract more homelessness to their city, which will then bleed over into my city, or it'll make enforcement more difficult for my city. Or if the state of California is implementing policies that will exacerbate homelessness or crime, well, then I feel compelled to speak out on that because once again, it's definitely in my lane. And so as it relates to spending $42,000 $42,000 per homeless individual. I love that stat because I think when the average person hears that stat, they ask themselves, well, how the heck is that money being spent? And it makes them start to question, well, maybe our policies that are in place aren't the best policies to address the situation. If we're spending more than any other state, maybe with the exception of New York, to address homelessness, why is it worse than ever before? And once you can get people to start to ask that question, that really opens up those conversations.
Peptides. There's been a lot of buzz about peptides and what they can do for the body, skin, muscles, and health. What exactly are they? And do they live up to the hype? Your body makes peptides. They are strings of amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. Peptide therapy involves using prescription-based peptides to help treat and manage a variety of health conditions to maximize performance. Peptides consist of 2 to 50 amino acids and are made naturally in the body to act as important signaling molecules for many physiological and cellular functions. There are over 7,000 known functions of peptides in the body, and adequate levels in the body are imperative for performing at optimal levels. Discover a transformative journey to optimal well-being with Livv Peptides. Livv Peptides offer a natural and effective approach to health support. Embrace the difference. Choose Livv for a path to vitality that prioritizes quality, innovation, and your unique wellness goals. My personal favorite is BPC 157 with thymosin beta for optimizing gut health, tissue regeneration, and healing. Head over to livvnatural.com and use code AllSmith for 20% off peptides. That's LIVVNatural.com with discount code AllSmith for 20% off peptides. I really appreciate you sharing, some of these political reform challenges that are they're controversial. You've taken a lot of heat about them, but they're things that I think should be talked about. I appreciate the open-mindedness. I also really appreciate that you're willing to do hard things.
Thanks.
And since Everest, you talked a little bit about kind of wanting to step back, take a little break, reset, recalibrate. But as far as your political career and growth trajectory, what's next for you?
I truly don't know. And that's not meant to be kind of a political cop-out of, oftentimes when you ask a politician, where do you going to run for next or what's next? They'll say, I don't know, but they really know. Like they actually do know, I'm planning to run for this or planning to run for that. I really don't know. I do think that there is a need for a voice to focus on policies and on politics. I think I'd be honored to be that voice. The way politics works though is oftentimes you're limited in what district you can run for simply based on kind of where you live. And living in Coronado, and I love Coronado, it's hard for me to imagine living anywhere else. And I don't like the idea of moving somewhere else just to run for run for another office. So I don't know, but I'm looking forward to finishing out my last 6 months as mayor. I have a couple of businesses that I have not been able to give the time and attention they deserve to grow and mature as a business as I would like. So I'm definitely going to focus more time on that. And after 6 months from now, my term is up. I'll probably take some time and just kind of reevaluate and see what is the best opportunity, what is the best course of action that would allow me to continue to have that voice of policies over politics and make the greatest impact for Coronado and the broader San Diego region. But I just don't know at this time. Yeah, totally. Something that I really admire so far in spending time with you is just to allude to it again, just the open-mindedness. I wish more people in the political sphere had that. And so, this might be overstepping a boundary, but Bailey for president at some point. I don't know. Sounds cool. Something I've been thinking about throughout our conversation today. And Bailey Bryce 2028. Let's do it.
Hey, I'd be down, just in the sense of I've never really leaned heavily into politics too much until the last few years of just really observing this healthcare concern and seeing 2 parents pass away from cancer and my mom fighting it now, and just seeing the challenges of short-staffed nurses. It's not the nurse's fault. It's just the way the healthcare system works. And right now my mom's under hospice, and the time allocation, each hospice nurse is allowed 1 hour with her each day, and then they have to go to their next obligation. And so it falls on the family to pay the salary of $80,000 to $100,000 to have a home care worker. And that's very complex. That's not a small amount of money.
Right.
And so the stresses that fall on families and the lack of education, the lack of seeming support, unless you really dig into it or have a family member that works in healthcare that understands the system very well, has really just perked my eyebrows around like, wow, like truly making an impact takes courage, takes bravery, takes long form communication like this, takes the resilience and the shielding to take that flack and recognize that everybody's genuinely trying to do their best. But at the end of the day, we all have different perspectives and different lenses and different stories that we come with, for sure.
Absolutely.
When you look at what you talked about before, the celebratory celebrity nature that comes with politics, and we look at, the challenges that California has faced with Governor Newsom, and let's just use the pandemic as an example and some of the controversies of people he was spending time with, the rumor mill of potential people that were in his pocket, and it seems to be his pursuit to try to get into presidential candidacy. What comes to mind there around, at least from my observation, it's very democratically led, and the open-mindedness isn't totally there. The policies were not consistent, as we talked about before. As you being somebody that's very open-minded and not necessarily married to the party, but more the policy, how do you kind of digest some of those things? And do you have access to have conversations just to see where his mind is and how it can best benefit the people of California?
Sure. So there are about 435 cities throughout California, give or take. And there are dozens of counties throughout California. And so it would be impossible for Governor Newsom to answer the phone for every single city, the mayor of every single city that might want to get in touch with their office. So typically communication goes through their staff members. And there are representatives of the governor's office that I can interact with, and I do interact with, depending on the issue that's important, or the issue that's the time of the year or whatever we're voting on. And so we do have communications with the governor's office. At the end of the day, the governor, has a set of values and policies that, whether sincerely held or not, he seems pretty adamant on moving forward with. And you try to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. You try to operate from the position of that people are operating in good faith, and that they might be persuadable if you were to introduce new information to them. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of politicians out there that have to either make political calculations that, well, I can't risk losing support from this special interest group just to do what is, quote unquote, the right thing to do, because sometimes doing the right thing is too hard to explain to the average voter. It won't maybe get you certain endorsements. It won't get you a certain campaign contribution. And all I can do is advocate on behalf of my community and let the chips fall where they may. Unfortunately, in my opinion, and I think the results of what's happened in the state of California bears this out, we're not implementing good policies. Like, when you look around, and I'm sure people that have left the state of California, when you look around at how beautiful our state is, all the amazing natural resources we have, the beaches, the deserts, the mountains, the oceans, and people are in the best climate, right, in the whole country, and people are leaving the state. I think it raises the question, well, why? Why are people leaving the state of California? And it's like, and these are people of means, right? Like my more wealthier friends are the ones that are leaving California. And if you ask them why, it's because, well, California's policies are just so terrible. So if you have those types of people that are leaving California, the ones that can actually afford to be here and have a very comfortable life, and they're choosing to leave this beautiful state, it gets back to me too. That's a sign of a failure of leadership. Everyone in the country should be wanting to come to California because it's so great, but they can't, and they can't because of the policies that are in place.
No, very well said. With us coming up on an election year, there's been a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The challenges overseas, the uncertainties associated with with leadership, the recent trials associated with Trump, the uncertainty of the health of President Joe Biden. What are your thoughts as to what the American people can expect moving forward?
I can remember back when, prior to Trump being elected in 2016, a lot of prognosticators would say, oh, well, if Trump is elected, the economy is going to crash. If Trump is elected, we're going to have these international wars breaking out. And none of that happened. We had peace in the Middle East. We had new peace deals signed between Saudi Arabia and Israel. We had an economy that was continuing to grow at a sustainable rate, and we didn't have widespread inflation. Now that we have all those things under a different president. And I think this, I don't know if this is historically the first, but it's certainly the first time in for my generation, and I think for most generations in the U.S. right now, where you have a choice between someone that was the president and someone that currently is the president. And it's almost like an A/B test. Well, which did we like better? What policies did we like more? And I think this also, once again, gets back to the question of, are people going to vote for the person or the policies? Trump has certainly said things that have upset a lot of people. Some of the things he's said has undoubtedly undeniably been taken out of context to make him appear to have said something that he never said. And that's just, how political spin typically goes. But if people vote for the policies that are in their best interests, I think a majority of Americans will end up voting for former President Trump. And because I think when you look at the unrest in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine and Russia, the uncontrolled border crisis, the runaway inflation we're experiencing, it's really tough to argue that we're better off today than we were 4 years ago. And so if that's the question that voters ask themselves, I think a majority of them will end up voting for President Trump.
For sure. There's also just a little bit more complexity tossed into the mix, and that is this rise of the influence of TikTok and AI. AI is evolving faster than I thought it would. Based on those kind of two concepts being relatively new to the human experience, but having tremendous infiltration and living rent-free between the ears of most humans, what advice would you give people as to how to navigate some of that complexity and make sure that they're making the right choices?
I think it's impossible to know for sure, but I think it comes down to finding sources you trust and not trusting every source. I know for me, I look to a handful of thought leaders that I trust when I'm trying to form an opinion on something. And short of that, there's so much information out there that's being taken out of context or has no basis in truth, but can spread so widely, so quickly. There's this old saying in politics: a lie can spread halfway around the world before the truth puts its pants on. And I think that's more true today than ever before. So I would recommend, find a handful of trusted sources and don't trust every source you find.
3 things always reveal themselves over the course of time: the sun, the moon, and the truth.
Over the course of time. Sometimes it takes a long time.
For sure. If you could have a billboard that you could leave on the Coronado Bridge as you embark on this next chapter for yourself sometime in the next 6 months, what would you like it to say?
Well, if I try to put a billboard next to the Coronado Bridge, I'd be run out of office before the next 6 months for sure.
For sure. Can't ruin those beautiful views, man.
No, we definitely can't. That's an interesting question. It would probably be a personal message of gratitude, because when I look back, I've been mayor now for 7.5 years, and 6 months remaining in my term, and then I'm termed out. And I think about all of the wonderful connection, like the memories that stand out to me the most. Yeah, I'm really proud of some of the policies we implemented, and I'm really proud that we made so much progress on the Tijuana sewage issue, which is like the biggest environmental issue in our whole country that never got the attention it deserved. And now it actually has funding, and shovels are going in the ground, and we're going to expand this wastewater treatment plant so our beaches will be open for the entire South Bay. Like, I'm really proud of a lot of those things. But the thing I take the most like personal joy in is the relationships I've made that I otherwise would never have made. My girlfriend, for example, met her in the July 4th parade 5 years ago. She's definitely not a shy individual. She literally walked right out into the middle of the parade and just introduced, like, stop the parade, and just introduced herself to me. And that's how we first met. And there's been so many other great relationships with business professionals, friends that have come along that I wouldn't otherwise have met. So I'm personally just very grateful. So the message on the billboard would probably just be a big thank you.
That's cool. There you have it. Approachable Leadership 101.
I like that.
Policy over politics, my man.
That's
a huge theme of today's conversation. And once again, congratulations on the Boston Marathon. Congratulations on summiting Mount Everest.
Thank you.
2 incredible accomplishments.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me today on AllSmith. And ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed my conversation with current Mayor of Coronado, Richard Bailey, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. Until next time.